learningZity. In this video, I'm going to develop basic CRUD operation form using JavaScript, CSS and HTML. Before going to do the implementation, I just want to show you the quick demo how this project is working. In here you can see there's a 4 input field including product code, product name, quantity and the price. So once you click the submit button, those input value goes to the right hand side table and you can edit and delete this any of record. So now let's move on to the implementation part. This is my JavaScript folder. In here I need to create 3 files: HTML file, CSS file and JavaScript file. First, I will create an index.html file to do my form implementation. As usual, in every HTML file, I starting from doc type followed by HTML and the closing bracket. Inside that, I open a head tag, and inside the head tag, I open another title tag which I use to place my page name. In my case it is CRUD operation. Now let's move on to the body part in our HTML. I first start from the table tag because I want to put my form inside the table. Now I open a tr tag which indicates the row and open td for column. And after that, I place my form inside that. Now let's add our label and input field to this form. First label name is product code. So now I'm going to create the relevant input field for that label. Likewise, you can do the same thing for other field also. Copy along with the div tag and change the label information and input field information. At the bottom of the form, I add 2 buttons, one for the submit and another one for the reset. Now I open another column and inside that I open table tag. This is the place I'm going to place my output value once I click the submit button. And here I only mention the table heading. Let's copy and paste and change the heading name. Now we are almost covered the basic thing in the form. Now I'm going to add a few things to my form. Let's add the autocomplete as off in the form. And also on submit event, I name it as a on form submit. So this function I will be implement in my JavaScript file later on. Let's add few more classes which help me to design my form. Now let's open style.css file. It's just nothing but a simple CSS style concept we can use for the form designing thing. Let's move on to that part. Before that, I want to add my background image to this folder. I forgot to add at the beginning of this video. Alright. In here, I'm just adding my background image URL, and I just want it not to be repeat on that interface. Therefore, I'm adding no repeat. And I set this image as a cover. Now let's design the table including width, margin and the background color. After that, I will do the designing for table list part. So in my column, I separated each column using a border. Now let's do the designing for each row in my table list. Now let's design input text and number. In here, I just want to change the quantity and the price type into number, not the text. After that, do the designing for submit and reset button. let's add our design for submit and reset button. Finally, same button design I apply for my edit and delete button also. Just like the reset and submit button, I am adding same hover design info button also. Now let's see how does it look like. Well, still my style.css doesn't apply. Let's see why. Here I need to add my style.css link to my HTML file. So now let's refresh it and see. Yes, here we go. Now we are complete the designing part of the form. Let's move on to the JavaScript implementation part where we complete the CRUD operation. In my script.js file, first I mentioned the onSubmit form function. And also I declare a global variable called selectedRow, which I use for my later on implementation. Now I'm going to implement a function to retrieve the data. Here I define a variable called formData. I'm going to push my HTML element ID into this object. So I can call it using document.getElementById and the input field ID name. Likewise, you can do the same thing for other field also. So at the end of this method, I want to return this form data. Before moving to the next function implementation, I will give you a brief idea about getElementById and getElementByTagName. When we are doing some particular manipulation using HTML element, that element ID we can use as a reference in our JavaScript file. So that is about the getElementById. When we have more than one element to be called, at that time we can use tagElementById. So in there the same concept is applied, but we are calling that tag name in our JavaScript file. Now I'm going to implement my insert record function. First, I define an object called table. In here, I'm using that explain concept to show the input value in the table. And I'm adding tbody tag in my index.html to show my input value. After that, I define another variable to add new row. So it goes up to the table length. That's why I add table.length. Every time when I add new record to the table length increment by 1. Now I'm going to create variable for each element in my form. The first cell would be product code and their index number is 0. Likewise, I can do the same thing for my other 3 HTML elements also. Now I'm creating another cell for my edit and delete button in table list. So now let's do the test run to check whether it is work or not. Once I click the submit button, those value is passed to the URL. So now what I want to do is to take those input value into my table. Now call insert new record method inside onFormSubmit function. In here I am using prevent default method to stop the default action in the element. In if part, I add insert new record. For the else part, I keep it blank. I will add it later on the implementation. And don't forget to add script.js file into index.html. Finally, I need to add another 2 functions which are onEdit and onDelete to complete the CRUD operation. In onEdit function, I pass one parameter because I want to edit a particular row detail which indicate using TD parameter. This selected row is a global variable I declare at the beginning of this video. Using this variable, I can get selected some particular row. To populate the value into the input field, once I click the submit button, to do that, I can use this concept along with the each cell. Likewise, I can apply the same thing for other fields. So once I did the addition in relevant field, I want to set that updated value into my table. So do that, I want to implement another function called update record. So in here I'm using a parameter form data. In here I want to mention each cell index and their ID. So now I'm calling this onEdit method inside my edit button. OnDelete function is starting from the confirmation message. If the confirmation is yes, then delete the record. First, I want to store the corresponding row inside this TD, and then after, to delete the relevant row, I want to mention element ID, call delete row function, and inside that I need to add relevant store list index. Once I delete the record, the form need to be reset. For that, I'm adding reset function here. And I'm calling reset form method inside the onDelete function also. Now let's compare our else part, which is update record, and finally reset the form. Now let's add the record to the form and see how is it working. Okay, edit also working. Let's check the delete button. Why it doesn't work? Let's check the code. Here I need to call onDelete method. Okay, I covered almost everything related to the CRUD operation using this form. If you have any doubt related to this, you can check the source code. I mentioned the GitHub link in the description below. So guys, until my next video, see you then.